I told my cousin he could take risks with his own future kids if he ever had any. I was making dinner when my 2-year-old son, Georgie, reached up and grabbed the handle of a pot sitting on the stove. The pot tipped. Boiling water spilled across his arm and part of his chest. He let out the most terrifying scream I'd ever heard. I snatched him up, rushed to the kitchen sink, turned on cool running water, and held his burned arm underneath it. As I did, I started counting in my head. When Georgie was born, I took a pediatric first aid class, and one lesson had been repeated over and over. For serious burns, use cool running water for 20 minutes. No ice, no butter, just cool water. My cousin Dean came running in from the living room. What happened? He pulled a pot of boiling water onto himself. Dean looked at Georgie's arm, already turning bright red as blisters began to form. You need ice. The water isn't enough. I shook my head. No, ice can damage the skin even more. That's nonsense. Ice is colder, so it'll work better. Move. I tightened my grip on Georgie. I've been trained for this, Dean scoffed. One little class, and suddenly you're an expert? My son is hurt, and I'm following the instructions I was taught. He is screaming, and you're just standing there. What kind of mother does that? The kind who's trying to stop the burn from getting worse. Dean stepped closer and reached toward Georgie. Give him to me. I'll help him. I shifted away and blocked him with my shoulder. Don't touch him. Hand him over right now. You're going to leave him scarred forever. Back off. Dean pulled out his phone. I'm calling Child Protective Services. This is abuse. You're letting him suffer instead of helping him. I'm doing exactly what medical professionals recommend. Oh, please. You took one class. That doesn't make you a doctor. He reached toward Georgie again. I turned so he couldn't get close. Try touching him again and I'm calling the police. He pointed at Georgie's arm. Look at it. It's getting worse while you just stand there. Georgie's cries had become quieter, but he was still sobbing against my shoulder. I kept counting. Only a few more minutes. Dean paced back and forth behind me. When he's covered in scars for the rest of his life, remember this moment. This will be your fault. I didn't answer. He stepped closer again. If I hadn't been here, you'd probably let him die because you're too stubborn to admit you're wrong. Finally, 20 minutes had passed. I turned off the water, wrapped Georgie's arm loosely in a clean towel, and headed for the door. We're going to the emergency room. Dean followed me outside. I'm coming too. Someone has to tell the doctors what really happened. The drive was silent except for Georgie's soft crying. At the hospital, Dean stayed close behind us and walked straight into the examination room. He stood with his arms folded, looking almost smug. The doctor examined Georgie's arm. What happened? Before I could answer, Dean interrupted. She kept him under cold water for 20 minutes while he screamed. I told her to use ice or butter, but she refused. She just watched him cry. The doctor looked at me. I explained exactly what had happened and why I'd used cool running water. He nodded immediately. You handled it correctly. Cool running water removes heat from the burn and helps limit the damage. Ice can injure the tissue, and butter traps heat inside the skin. He carefully checked Georgie's arm again. This is a second-degree burn. But because you cooled it properly, there's a very good chance it'll heal with little to no permanent scarring. Dean uncrossed his arms. So, she just got lucky. The doctor shook his head. No, she followed the correct first aid procedure. Dean looked irritated. Well, she still didn't have to make such a huge scene. She shoved me and threatened to call the police. I looked straight at him. You know what, Dean? If you ever have children, you can ignore medical advice with them. But you don't get to make those decisions for mine. His face lost all color. Just 2 months earlier, his fiancée had ended their engagement after they learned he was infertile, making my words hit harder than I'd intended. Dean stared at me without saying anything. Then he turned around and walked out of the room. The doctor quietly focused on Georgie's chart and acted like he hadn't heard a thing. A few weeks later, Georgie's burn had healed beautifully. He never developed any noticeable scars. Dean hasn't spoken to me since.